Hello and welcome to the big picture. The last 2 days has seen some important developments at the international level, with the G20 leaders gathering at Hangzhou in China, where the BRICS meeting was also held on the sidelines. As far as India was concerned, the bilateral ties between India and China and also its concerns on POK and China's role in it figured prominently. The Indian Prime Minister raised concerns about the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which passes through POK, and also problems of terrorism and its funders. Meanwhile, even as these concerns were being raised, news has emanated from Pakistan about its cabinet approving a long-term defense agreement with China. Coming as it does in the backdrop of the US-India defense agreement last week, what does this mean? What does the Hangzhou concerns raised by India mean, and what is the response of China to it? Where is the relationship between China and India heading? We will discuss all this today with Vivek Katju, former ambassador, Baladas Ghoshal, Secretary General Society for Indian Ocean Studies, Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor of Chinese Studies at the JNU, M.K.Bhadrakumar, former ambassador, on the phone line from Trivandrum, and Atul Aneja, Associate Editor of The Hindu, on the phone line from Hangzhou. All of you. Srikanth, you know, how do you look at this developments, what has happened in Hangzhou in the last 2 days, especially the statements made by the Prime Minister, and latest, he has also been quite, strongly advocating that those who have been funding terrorism have to be isolated and also sanctioned.
Well, I don't think the Hangzhou summit has come out with something different, starkly different, because these have been discussed before. In 2015, for instance, when Prime Minister Modi went to Beijing, this has been raised. When President Xi Jinping came to India in September 2014, this has been raised. So I think the meeting at Hangzhou is mainly at the economic level rather than at the political or security level.
Okay, I think there's some problem with your audio there. Please, ensure that there's no echo there. Mr. Bhadrakumar, do you agree with Srikanth Kondapalli that this is more of an economic summit than anything to do with strategic affairs?
Girish, I didn't hear what was said earlier because there was something wrong with the line. Anyway, I can address your question this way. G20 is definitely both economics and politics. There's no doubt about it. But what has happened today is that that on the sidelines of the G20.
Yes.
Why I say it's economic in the sense that for so obvious reasons, the locus of growth in the world economy has shifted away from the industrial world, and therefore G7 is increasingly losing its relevance. G20 comprises also the emerging powers, the powers of the future, and therefore it's going to be inevitably a more meaningful forum as time goes by. Of course, it's in its infancy at the moment. Now, politics definitely comes in because good economics is always about politics. But beyond that, what has happened is the geopolitical overshadows.
Right.
There are a number of course, when we look at it from the Indian point of view, it takes a certain coloring in terms of our relations with China, in terms of South China Sea, in terms of India's relations with Pakistan, and so on. But the geopolitical matrix, to address your question, it has different templates. Now, for example, as far as Obama is concerned, this time probably the most significant meetings he has had are with the Turkish President Erdogan and with Putin, which is just got over in today.
Mr. Bhadrakumar, Bhadrakumar, let us confine ourselves to to India, China, and what has happened on that scene.
Now, let me come straight to the topic that you want to discuss. If that's the way you would like it, let me just address it this way. That this news which has come from Pakistan is undoubtedly a very significant development in the sense that even though Sino-Pak military relationship has an old history, now it is being formalized within a pact. And then, more importantly, the report, if it is true, which has come in one Pakistani newspaper, in 2011, apparently when Pakistanis sounded the Chinese, they were lukewarm about it because of its negative repercussions for India-US relations as far as they are concerned. So obviously, if the Pakistani cabinet has cleared it, that means, that there is a greater receptiveness on the part of the Chinese to this idea of formalizing the relationship within a military pact. Now that is a very important milestone in the politics of our region, undoubtedly, because it's a defense pact, full-fledged defense pact coming. Now what it contains, time only will tell, whether there is going to be, in terms of mutual security assurances and so on, which means, maybe full-fledged military bases. One doesn't know what it is, or it's going to be just formalizing it in terms of a certain strategic matrix. That is what it remains to be seen. Now, the bottom line is this, that what we're seeing here is that there is a churning taking place in the geopolitics of our region, a paradigm shift, if one may put it like that. And this is what we are seeing is the beginning of the tip of the iceberg. A realignment is beginning. Now, this is consequent upon a number of other things which have happened in terms of, greater proximity between India and the US, a certain cooling down between India and China, and the rebalance strategy of the United States in the Asian continent, and so on. Now, they are casting their shadows on this.
Okay.
Now,
sir.
how this is going to develop,
we'll have, I'll come back to you. Okay, sir. I'll back to you, Mr. Ghoshal. So, you see some kind of there was a cooling down between India and China, and you think that anything has improved now in the last 2 days after the meetings between the Indian Prime Minister and the Chinese President, the kind of statements which are emanating from there?
I don't think relations can improve overnight in that way. Maybe some understanding could be worked out between the two countries, and particularly if one emphasizes Modi's point of view that both of them should be sensitive to each other's concerns. So from that perspective, one could say that maybe they had some conversations which might have assured each one of them that they would not do anything which might go against the interests of the other. But I think the concerns, particularly India's concerns vis-a-vis China, with the kind of developments that are taking place in the region, I think that itself is quite sort of an important factor in terms of shaping India's attitude towards China.
Atul, what is what is it that you are reading from there? There was a significant statement made by the Chinese president saying that China is willing to work with India to maintain their hard-won sound relations and further advance the cooperation. Now, what does he mean by this?
You see, what happened yesterday, from here, it looks as if it is a very highly significant meeting, an attempt to reboot the relationship, which was on a downslide because of a number of issues, including NSG and CPAC, Masood Azhar, among others. So this was what the Indian officials here were also saying, that this is an attempt to reset the relationship at the highest level, and therefore the idea was not to go into details of any of these issues, but they were flagged obviously at this time. So this is a message which is coming out from here. Now, but it was a very fine balancing act, because when we heard the spokesman, he started by saying that I will not go into specifics, because at this level you don't talk specifics, you're only giving broad directions to the relationship. But he did mention in response to questions that CPEC came up for that. So you are trying to address various constituencies, because you were being sensitive to what the Chinese, they didn't want to that the Indian media or others, the global media which is also present over here, would highlight these particular issues or differences. Yet there was a domestic constituency, the Hots back home, who would want some tidbits to say, there is a muscular kind of approach which was followed during talks between Mr. Modi. And so it was a very clever and calibrated kind of a response which came from the Indian side yesterday, which also mentioned CPEC but did not go into any such details. Now, the Chinese were also responding, because the bottom line which came out was that the relationship has been grounded in a way, or has been impeded because of lack of sensitivity to each other's aspirations and core strategic interests. And this is a formulation which was coming both from the Indian side as well as from the Chinese side. And this was an attempt to sound each other that if we are appreciative and if we understand each other's core interests without spelling them out so directly, then that would be a good sort of a template to revive and reboot the relationship. That's where it ended yesterday. But the overall spin which was coming out from either side was that the relationship is has a chance of moving now in a positive direction. So this was the overall kind of a sense which one got after the meeting took place yesterday. Less of negativity and more trying to see that there is a potential in the improvement of ties. Also references to BRICS, etc. coming, and the Goa summit taking place next week. Both the Chinese and the Indian side, Mr. Modi also raised it. And also the issue of terrorism was highlighted very strongly from both sides. But there was also the shadow of Pakistan, which came from Mr. Modi's formulation, that you can't discriminate this funding of terrorism. Somebody is doing it, etc., etc. Without naming Pakistan, I mean, that was a bull in the China shop as well. In yesterday's meeting between Mr. Modi and President Xi Jinping.
Okay. So, Mr. Katju, do you see the shadow of Pakistan looming over what has happened there? The Prime Minister's clear message there saying that one single nation in South Asia is doing it and all. And what is the motive behind raising these issues there?
Look, few points. First, in summits of this nature, there is an attempt to ensure that no acrimony creeps in. Quite clearly, both sides, the Indians and the Chinese, have gone a certain distance in seeking to ensure this. Let us be mindful of the fact that the Chinese president will be attending BRICS shortly in India, and therefore there is an interest in the Indian side too that the pitch doesn't get queered before the BRICS summit. That's point one. But having said this, the second point is equally valid, that despite all the good talk and the fine formulations, none of the basic problems that beset the relationship as of now, the Sino-Indian relationship, have been addressed in this meeting. There are fine words expressed by both leaders that each country should respect the strategic concerns of the other, but we know for a fact that there is a realignment of forces taking place in the region as a whole, and that the Sino-Pakistan relationship is now acquiring a far greater foundation in a positive pillar as distinct from a shared negativity towards India. And the Chinese are signaling clearly that they don't want India to intrude in this positive pillar, that is, or to weaken this, try to weaken this positive pillar that is developing. The CPEC is an indication of that. So we are where we were in a sense, and we've got to now take steps to ensure our own security concerns and our strategic interests. We can't expect the Chinese to be mindful of our strategic interests, especially where Pakistan is concerned, in terms of terror especially. Also in terms of giving access to the Chinese, and as Bhadran was saying, we really don't know what is going to be part of this new arrangement between the Chinese and the Pakistanis in the defense sector, and we have to await revelations in this respect, but actions on the ground will reveal to us in the near future which direction this is taking. I cannot see any direction being conducive to our interests. On terror, I think the Prime Minister, just a couple of sentences, has shown a new vigor. His formulation is, which has just come in news reports, these news reports are accurate, his formulations in the G20 interventions itself on terror in the context of the financing of terror.
Right.
The FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. In that context, I think the Prime Minister has said that countries that sponsor terror should be sanctioned and isolated and not rewarded. Now, if such, and
These are very tough words.
No, in this context, he has also made clearly a reference to Pakistan, where he says that there is one country in South Asia whose agents are spreading terror. Now, if you take this as a whole, his intervention as a whole, then the question arises that if the Prime Minister is saying, and rightly, that countries that sponsor terror should not be rewarded but sanctioned and isolated, then
whom is he telling this?
No. He is.
Whom is he referring this
to?
He
is referring this to the international community quite clearly. And the forum is the international community because G20 is a very, very significant international forum now. But the question is that then what will India do? Because if you are advocating that such nations should be sanctioned and isolated, then obviously that advocacy must begin with you.
No, it has all kinds of repercussions. Srikanth, you're there? Srikanth, what kind of repercussions do you see? The kind of tough words being used by the Prime Minister in the G20 and also, in his meetings with the Chinese President. What does this imply?
Well, I think the focus is still on the international economic issues, on innovation, economic growth patterns, domestic demand increase, against trade protectionism, financial flows. These are the areas where the G20 has been traditionally focusing on. The terror-related issue is a security issue, non-traditional security. That will come up in the BRICS meeting in Goa in a more prominent manner. But one of the aspects of terrorism, obviously, as you mentioned, is the financing aspect on which there is some discussion at the G20. But the overall focus of the G20 is mainly on the economic. The Prime Minister had mentioned about the terror-related issues during his visit to China mid last year. He had mentioned this before in the meetings with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, at Fortaleza, at UFA meeting, and now in Goa meeting. This will also be highlighted.
But you don't see,
I think the focus has to be
Srikanth, one second.
Always on the economic issues.
Srikanth, 1 second.
Yeah.
What Mr. Katju was pointing out, the new formulation about isolating these forces which are funding terrorism, not just sanctioning them. These are new formulations which is being made by India in such an international forum. So what does that imply, and how is China going to take this kind of formulations of India?
The United Nations Security Council had passed 3 resolutions on counterterrorism, including on the financing aspect and so on. Quite elaborate way they have discussed in the Security Council. So I think this is an extension. The discussion related to the financing is a kind of discussion. G20 resolution on terrorism is not a major, of any impact compared to, say, the United Nations Security Council, or even we can say the BRICS announcement on terror. So I think while this has been raised before, the issue has come up also in the G20, and which reflects to the Indian concerns on counterterrorism. But I think the overall agenda of the G20 is still at the economic level.
Okay.
Yes, should keep that in mind.
Ghoshal.
I think you asked that question about who was he targeting, who was he addressing the question.
Exactly.
I think it could be even addressed to China because, you see, in the context of China-Pakistan Defense Pact, I mean, it's a kind of a reward to a certain extent from the Chinese point of view. And India was also, I think, addressing the question to China, saying that, I mean, you yourself also face terrorism.
The use of the word rewarding them instead of isolating and sanctioning.
That means rewarding means this defense pact.
Exactly.
Itself is a reward. And this was, of course, coming in the sense that the relations between Pakistan and United States have gone very in recent years. And in the context of India-US Defense Pact that was signed recently, I think it was almost one should have expected that something would have come.
Okay.
I mean, the relations between China and Pakistan had been going on for quite some time, and I think this is just a formalization of that kind of a contact.
Mr. Katju.
You see, the issue is not what emerges from the G20 in the G20 communique on terror. That, of course, reflects a consensus. It has to be a consensus thing. What is more important here for our discussion is the Prime Minister's intervention in G20 on the financing, on the FATF, and the need to isolate those who are sponsoring terror, including financing terror. And there he has been unmistakably clear. And as I said, now what will India's follow-up steps be in the context of Pakistan? Clearly the Chinese will not be willing to walk the Indian road. They've demonstrated it. As I've said, there's a whole transformation taking place in the Sino-Pak relationship, and we've got to be conscious of this. We face now new challenges in this respect.
Mr. Bhadrakumar, would you agree with that? That, you know...
See, let me put it this way, Girish. I think this part of it is actually for the domestic audience in India. Because, what Atul pointed out is very important in the sense that, a certain feeling would come, and it has been reflected in the media today already, that, Prime Minister has gone soft on China. Soft is quote unquote. I don't know what is soft, in this sort of a situation, a complex relationship. But, that needs to be tackled. But otherwise, objectively, look at it this way. The G20, Prime Minister has addressed an audience comprising countries, almost all of them are complimenting Pakistan for its contribution to the fight against terrorism.
Right.
Now, look at it, for instance, the Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He traveled to Hangzhou via Islamabad. And on his way in his aircraft, he sent a message which we ought to read. Coming so soon after our Prime Minister's visit to Saudi Arabia, Prince Salman's message to Nawaz Sharif. So, starting from Saudi Arabia, you are looking at a number of countries, even Russia compliments Pakistan. So this is a no-go area thing, but it will have a lot of mileage in the country. I don't see this traveling otherwise very far. The point that we have to reckon with is, I come back to this, unlike in the Cold War era, the American, the US-China rivalries, competition, or jostling, whatever you may like to call it, that is casting shadows on our regional politics.
Yes.
Because as far as China is concerned, what China is doing with Pakistan is no longer India-centric. It is in terms of countering the US's rebalance strategy and in getting rid of the American influence over Pakistan. Now, that is from the Chinese point of view. So we are not going to get very far by telling them that they have to jettison the CPEC, they have to, whittle down the relationship and so on. We can't do that because they are looking at it from a different point of view. We are talking over their head, actually. And from Pakistan's point of view, again, now, whatever might have been Pakistan's reticence in the past in moving forward with China, now they think, rightly or wrongly, and I think wrongly, that India has become a sidekick of America. I don't think India can ever be, because it's such a big country with so much of diversity, and it's our DNA that we cannot be anyone's sidekick. But the perception matters.
Right.
And that is what is taking place here. So from both sides you find, and then on top of it, as someone has said here now, the US-Pakistan relationship also has deteriorated because
Absolutely.
the American expectations that the Westerners among the Pakistani elites would somehow revive that relationship, that has foundered. John McCain's visit was probably a landmark visit in that to test the water.
Okay.
Now, therefore, that relationship has also deteriorated.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
we have to,
Yes, Mr.
You see, the question is not whether he is addressing a domestic audience. I think what he is signaling is that whereas and I don't think he will be so naive as to expect that countries like America and China and Saudi Arabia will sanction Pakistan or isolate Pakistan. I think at the bottom he is signaling to the international community and not the domestic audience. Also, not only
just-
the domestic audience,
exactly.
that India will, notwithstanding all this, India towards Pakistan will now be more robust and more realistic. And the elasticity which was there earlier exhibited will perhaps no longer be there to be, or the international community should not expect that any longer.
So this expressing concern as far as POK is concerned and the CPEC passing through POK,
Yes.
knowing fully well that it's not going to have any impact.
No, but this is an indication that, look, whereas in the past we did not invoke what was happening in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, that inhibition is no longer there with us.
So
I'm telling the Chinese that be mindful of this, and that I fully approve this approach.
Okay, Atul, so how do you look at this? Do you think that this approach, this approach which is a more robust approach as Mr. Katju says, is it having an impact on the other nations? How are the other nations looking at this new robust approach, bringing in POK, questioning the CPEC, passing through that, all these things? How will China take all this?
Girish, that when you're ultimately, if you have to have a modus vivendi, you have to have certain leverages in your hand, and then you can bargain that when you negotiate with countries like China or others. So, India has sort of raised a Balochistan issue, and we have also raised the CPEC issue very strongly. Now, that is a signal. It's a kind of attempt to acquire a leverage for which can be then used at a certain time in the future. But, I agree that you need certain leverages, though I'm a little skeptical that while you say that you want these leverages, do you actually have it? For example, in Balochistan, what really can we do because of the geography of Balochistan? It's not like East Pakistan of 1971 where you had the geographical contiguity. So, your capacity to maybe covert action you can do. But beyond that, as a bargaining chip to counter what Pakistan may do regarding Kashmir, that is a possibility. But beyond that, I don't see what do we really have the leverage? And Chinese are asking,
Okay.
when I talk to them, they said, what really, we know your Prime Minister made this statement on Independence Day, but what really can you do unless Iran is cooperating? Because they have a geographical contiguity with Balochistan. So on the ground, how much can you do on Balochistan? While the
Okay.
statement
Good
is
to keep them
important, we have
guessing.
noted.
Okay.
Yeah. The
Very
second
quickly,
point,
Atul.
which Girish is that, speaking to the Chinese, their perspective, and I go to what Bhadrakumar just said, their perspective is that, we have a big problem of terrorism with Xinjiang. Now, what is the route? From Xinjiang, these guys go to Tajikistan, and from there they get into Fergana Valley, or they can get into Afghanistan and then Pakistan, and some of them go to Middle East and join the ISIS, etc. So, for them, for the Chinese point of view, you got to have a security mechanism which stops the flow of Xinjiang terrorists. And for that, on August 3rd, they formed this quadrilateral mechanism with the Tajiks, Afghans,
Okay.
and the Pakistanis.
Okay, Atul, we are running out of time. Running out
From
of time,
Chinese
sorry.
point of view, Pakistan is part of the solution, not
Okay.
part of the problem.
Okay, I think on that note we'll end. As far as China is concerned, they look at Pakistan differently. We are looking at it differently. But as all my panelists pointed out, things are changing. Relationships are changing in the region. How it will all emanate, how it will all take shape, we'll have to wait and watch. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue, the big picture, same time tomorrow.